seen here at the museum?
My name is Ethan, and my favorite thing that I've seen was the talking Christmas tree.
Bruce.
Cool, awesome.
Did you see that just recently?
I saw it last year with my mom.
Last year. Well, he's here again this year if you want to stop in and see him. He's here until the weekend of New Year's.
That's a great tradition. Bruce the Spruce is part of course, the Prangies department store, an old department store that used to be in Green Bay, and there was a tree that would talk. So we're bringing back that spirit of the history of Green Bay and Christmas time. So I'm glad you like it. It's always a fun thing to get inside there. But just so you know, the secret is there's a person inside the tree. It's not a real tree talking, right? You knew that.
You ruined the magic. All right, let's try one from the other classroom here. So if you can help us out, whoever's got a question, have them come on up, and we'll hear from them.
That's the wrong class. Right here, in front of my computer. Oh. The wrong class is up there. All right, go ahead.
All right, so what's your favorite exhibit here?
The dinosaur exhibit.
The dinosaurs. Well, we have two outside, right? You probably see those, the T-Rexes. They're actually from an old exhibit from the early 1990s when we had a big dinosaur exhibit. But we actually don't, you've probably seen this, we don't have dinosaurs inside the museum. But those dinosaurs on the outside are kind of a reminder of that. But also, it's our way of saying, hey, these are really cool sculptures. So it's really about the art of making things, in this case in the shape of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So we don't have bones of dinosaurs, but we do have fossils of different species in the museum. But I'm glad you like those two dinosaurs.
All right. So I'm sure everybody has a favorite exhibit, but we don't have a lot of time here. We can hear from everybody. But I'm going to ask another question here. Who can kind of think about it for a minute? What do you think a museum does? We do a lot of things here, but let's switch back over to this classroom here.
The young man with the green sweater on. There you are. Yep.
Yeah, come on up and tell us, what do you think a museum does?
The museum they'll get artifacts from other museums, or they'll find artifacts somewhere.
Ooh, big word there, artifacts. That's awesome. So you know what artifacts are, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yes.
Look behind us here. There's some artifacts. There's a metal suit of armor, right? There's also a bell right down here.
Let me move out of the way for a second so you can see it.
So the technical term for an artifact is anything made or used by people. So it has to be made by people. So in this case, this bell is actually the oldest, it's from the oldest school in Green Bay. Did you know that? That's pretty cool. It's called the Sales School, it used to be. So you're in a school right now, and you probably have a bell that rings, but it doesn't sound like this one that used to ring in Green Bay in the early 1800s. So that's kind of cool. But the suit of armor is even older. So he's several hundred years old, and somebody wore this in the medieval period in England. So artifacts are all the kind of stuff, the cultural material, the stuff that people have made and used over time, and we try to tell stories with those artifacts. So you're absolutely right with how we display and then tell stories with artifacts.
Let's hear from the other class here. Can someone else come on up and tell us what you think the job of a museum is?
I'm thinking that they make facts about all the old stuff back then, and then they publish it. Something like that.
Research. Yep, that's one thing that we do. And even more importantly, actually, we do a little bit of research here at the museum, especially when we're trying to build a new exhibit. But one of the biggest jobs we have is making our stuff available for other researchers. So if someone is doing a project, or maybe they're even writing a book or something, if the museum here has an object or a photograph or some other artifact that they think would be helpful for their research, they might come here and we might help them. We might get that artifact out of our storage area and help them study it. So that's a big job that we have. That's a very good answer.
Yeah, and publishing, a lot of times that used to be a thing of the past with museums. It's harder and harder to get publication. But really what we do is we try to make our material, our objects accessible. So for you guys, you're reading books that have probably pictures of really old things in it. Well, most likely those things came from museums and are in museums. So ideally, it's for you guys to not only see them in a book, but then actually come and see the real thing. And that's what makes museums unique, is that we have the actual real stuff, like a suit of armor or the first bell in Green Bay from a school. Good answer, though.
Do we want to take a couple more? Go back to the other class. Does anybody else have an idea what a museum might do? No. Way in the back there. Nice shirt. We're hoping for another win this weekend. What do you think a museum does?
I think a museum like takes artifacts and puts them on display for other people.
Right.
Yeah, and that's actually my favorite part about working at this museum. Actually, is both helping to create the displays and then bringing people like yourself, kids, adults, people of all ages, taking them through the museum and telling them all the really cool stuff. Because those of you who've been through this museum know, as you go through, there's the objects, and then there's also the labels, where you can read about the objects, but there's not nearly enough room to put all the information about every single object. So the cool part about coming in the museum and getting a tour, your tour guide will know things about the object that we don't have in the label. We'll be able to tell you some stories, some really interesting facts that maybe aren't in the label. Because when they made the museum, they had to make choices. They had to take each artifact and learn all the information about it, and they had to decide, okay, well, what are we going to put in the label, and what do we have to leave out? So the cool part about coming to the museum and having a tour is you can hear some of those stories that were left out for whatever reason. Some of those stories are even better than the ones that were left on the label.
Yes, but fact was the big word there. The key word, fact, meaning it's not fake, right? But it's real. That something actually has truth to it. And as far as going back to the stuff, I actually have a real object right here. This is probably the oldest, one of the oldest artifacts we have made by humans, and it comes from Wisconsin. And it's a projectile point, a spear point that was used probably to hunt deer or extinct mammals in Wisconsin. So museums, we have hundreds, if not thousands of these kinds of objects here at the museum. One of the oldest specimens, so that's not something made by a human, but naturally occurring, that's probably geology, that we have lots of rocks and things that are from the earth in this region, and that's over 1 billion years old. So this is about 10,000 years old. We have things going back billions of years, but that's long before humans were around. So if you like history, this is a three-dimensional reality into that history book. So that's a fun place to work.
Yeah. And Kevin, since we're on the subject, someone here sent us a question about preserving the artifacts and taking care of them. Can you tell us why you're wearing those beautiful gloves?
Yeah, Michael Jackson is one of my idols. No, I'm just kidding. We wear white gloves because we have oils on our fingers. When we handle artifacts, especially metal artifacts like these guys behind us, your fingers will leave fingerprints on them, and it actually breaks down the metal over time. So it's part of good conservation. It's just good museum practice to wear, in this case, cotton gloves for these kinds of things. There's other types of gloves we wear, but generally it's a good practice so that we can take care of the object as best we can, so that future generations, so when you get older, or your kids or grandkids, they can also still see those objects and that they were well cared for. That's why we wear the gloves.
Yeah, it's a big responsibility. All the items that we have in our collection, our job is to take the absolute best care of them that we can. Because the cool thing about this museum, it's the Neville Public Museum of Brown County. So really, as residents of Brown County, these are all your artifacts. That's the cool thing. Now, I wish that maybe you could come in and play with them. But what it really means is that Kevin and I and other folks who work here at the museum, our job is to take care of them as best we can. We take that job really seriously because we're working for you and trying to protect your stuff. So that's why we have to take a lot of precautions, wearing the gloves. There's a lot of security involved, so that way the artifacts stay safe. Different artifacts are stored in different ways. We have some things that especially film. We actually have a big freezer that things are frozen in because that is the best way to take care of them. We try to keep the lights off as much as possible because light is another thing that can be harmful to some types of artifacts. So there's a lot of science involved in really knowing which materials need to be taken care of in different ways. So that's another big thing we do. All right, and let's go to the other classroom. One last thing. We talked about a lot, but does anybody else know one more thing that a museum might do?
Yes.
I think a museum finds artifacts and presents them so other people can see them. That they
So
from other places.
yep, so that is something, that is a really great point. We do actually have lots of artifacts here, but we do sometimes loan those artifacts to the museums. I know one recently, we have an old artifact called a mono wheel, which is an early type of bicycle. How does it work, Kevin? You sit in the middle of it and pedal with your hands?
It's like a giant wheel. Imagine that with a seat on the inside, and then you pedal it with your hands. And it's from about the 1870s, so it's over 100 years old, almost 150 years old soon. So there's, and other museums love that kind of stuff that they don't have in their collection, and then we can share it with them. So definitely that's a great point, a good question and answer to what a museum is that, yeah, it's a place to hold them, but to share those stories with not only other museums, but with people that come to visit. So it should be a fun and engaging environment too, right? Just like you have fun in your classroom and you learn a lot, hopefully when you come to your museum, you can also absorb a lot of really new ideas that can inspire you to open up your book or a tablet and learn a little bit more about something that happened in the past.
That's a great way to start wrapping things up here, because we're getting on with our time. The last thing we wanted to do was answer a few questions, and we talked about a few of these things before, so we'll go through them. We talked about what the oldest artifacts were, so things that were from the Earth. Geology goes back 1 billion years, and then Kevin showed us that projectile point that's 10,000 years old, older than that. Why is the museum called the Neville Museum? That is a good question. So we're actually celebrating a birthday this year. It's the Neville Museum's 100th anniversary, or 100 years old. And it was created in 1915. There was a Green Bay Art Club, and they put on a little tiny exhibit inside the library here in Green Bay at the time. And it was so popular, that exhibit, that people decided, you know what, Green Bay is a growing town. People are really interested in learning, so we really need to get ourselves a museum. And it wasn't until a few years later that the first museum really was started. It was given, there was some money given by a family called the Masons, and what they wanted to do was give some money to start a museum, and they said that we'll give you this money, but what you have to do is call it the Neville Museum. Just Arthur and Ella
Neville. They were kind of big movers and shakers in Green Bay back in the day, and so they were big fans of history and knew a lot, and they wrote books as well. So it was named after them and has since been named the Neville Public Museum ever since.
Yep. All right, another question we had, how do you clean the expensive stuff? So.
Yeah, there's obviously, the museum has over 100,000 objects in our collection. That's a lot of stuff to keep clean, and some things we just do to keep them clean preventatively. So we dust them, and we make sure that there's not things falling on them or definitely liquid on them. But most of the time, if we're going to put it on exhibit, we send it to a specific restoration company or somebody who conserves objects. It's called conservation is the term. And so it depends on what it is. If it's an oil painting, some people have special skills to clean oil paintings, and other people have special skills to work with wood. So we work with specialists in this regard to make things, get them back to their proper condition. But for the most part, it's called preventative care. So we make sure that we're just making sure that they're in the right condition, environment where we store them or put them on exhibit.
Trying to make sure they don't get dirty or damaged in the first place. It's the best way to do it.
Yep.
All right, next question. How many people work there? We're a pretty small museum staff here. There's 12 of us that work in this building. There's Kevin, who's our assistant director. We have a director. We have a curator who helps design the exhibits. We have a couple different technicians. We have one that actually builds the stuff in the museum, so she's kind of like a museum carpenter. We have another gentleman here who does a lot of our digital designs. He takes photos. He designs our website. He designs the graphics that you see in the museum. We have a collections manager who is really in charge of taking care of all this stuff and really helping us out to do our jobs. My job is to work with people like you and share all the really cool objects and stories that the museum has to offer. Forgetting anybody?
And then we have a foundation, a museum foundation, that actually pays for all the exhibits. And so there's different types of exhibits. Ones that we create ourselves. It takes a lot of money and time. Sometimes we're planning them out years in advance, 3 years in advance. And so the foundation actually raises funds for that, as well as purchasing new artifacts, which I think is a question too. How do we get some of this stuff?
Yep. Yeah, and then we also sometimes can rent exhibits that were designed by a different museum and they travel around the country. And then also sometimes we work with other groups who might have artifacts and we work with them and we're kind of the host for their collection. We help them design the exhibit. So those are kind of the ways that we get exhibits.
Yep.
Which might have been another question. When was the museum built? This building was completed in 1983.
1983.
Yeah, previous to that we were located in the library building, which is not even the library building anymore. It's over on the east side of the river in Green Bay downtown.
Still there. It was built in 1903 in an old library. It looks like a Greek temple. But yes, it's on the corner of Doty and Jefferson Street. But that's when the museum started in the basement. And it actually was where they had school classes in 1915, 100 years ago. So very similar to your classroom now. It wouldn't have been that different, really, with those books and those desks that kids were sitting in. And then they had a display in there. And from there, it grew and grew and grew until now we have this huge regional museum for people that come from all over the world to see some amazing stuff.
All right, our most popular artifact. That one we had a lot of trouble with because there's some things, if you all have been to this museum, you probably all have your own favorite thing. What did we decide was the most popular?
There's a couple of things. I think probably the most significant, I would say, is Charles de Langlade. Does that ring a bell? There's a name de Langlade from your history books. He's the father of Wisconsin, right? He was the first European settler in Wisconsin. And in the mid-1700s, and so we have his coat, a very important coat that is from when it was English, when this part of the country was owned by the English, but he was also French in his origin, so from Canada. So I think in terms of artifacts, we have some very, very significant early French fur trade era artifacts, and you can tell about the car, which is kind of cool
yeah,
too.
we have a car. It's called a Holsum. That's the brand,
Holzman.
Excuse me. That's the kind of the brand name, the maker, like Ford or Chevy, but it's Holzman. And this car is it's almost 100 years old, or it might be about 100 years old. And if you've seen it, it's kind of weird. It looks like kind of a horse and buggy, but there's an engine on it. And it doesn't have a steering wheel. It's got like a stick that you use to steer it with. And it doesn't have a foot pedal brake. It's got a lever you pull on it. So to me, it kind of looks like a horse and buggy combined with a bike, combined with a car. And the cool thing about that is it shows that the car makers didn't wake up one day and all of a sudden design a modern car just like we see outside. There were different stages. Just like if you see pictures from the 1950s and 60s, the cars looked a lot cooler back then than they do now. So it's always changing. But this Holzman car we have it's a cross between those early horse and buggy, which was the inspiration for the car, and then the modern day car today. So it's sort of like the missing link between horses and buggies and cars.
And you might think of the mastodon, a lot of people think it's a mammoth, the one that you walk by and it goes, roar! Well, it's not an artifact because it's not a real specimen, it's not a real mastodon, but it is a prop. We call it a prop. But it's still probably what a lot of people remember or think of the Neville as. Part of our brand or identity is the mastodon, these extinct ancient furry elephants that used to roam this region.
Yeah. Is it true that he's made out of cowtails?
He is. He's made out of hundreds and hundreds of cow tails that are dyed red, and that's how they made that look, to make it look shaggy from when it was really cold during the Ice Age.
All right, and last question here. Somebody asked, has anything ever been stolen?
I was just asking our collections manager, Louise Botenhauer, about that, and she said that nothing has been stolen, as far as we know, from this storage where we're sitting now, where we house our artifacts. But on exhibit, apparently a number of years ago, there was some money and a quilt that was stolen off of exhibit, which was very bad. But the good part of the story is that it was returned years later in a box. Mysteriously, it was returned. So somebody probably felt bad about it. So, because the idea is that these things are for everybody to see and for us to share with them. So it's never a good thing to steal anything. But fortunately, we've been lucky in many respects.
All right, well, that was our last question here. Obviously, Kevin and I could talk for hours about this because we really love working here, we really love the museum, and we really like talking to you as well. But the good news is that we'll be able to do this again. It'll be after the holidays. We're working on setting up the time with your teachers, but we can't wait to see you again, and we can't wait to show you some more cool things from the museum. And we'll see you soon.
Hey, boys and girls, we can't hear you, but give us a double hand wave to thank Kevin and Ryan for helping us out.
All right,
Awesome.
Thank you. Happy holidays, Schwabenon. And go Packers.
All right, bye. Take care.